Right, I want to take you now to a live briefing, the SACP's post-Central Committee press briefing on key outcomes of the meeting and launch of the crowdfunding initiative. It has started. Let's take you there now live.
General Secretary Dr. Nzimande will present the statement of the key outcomes of the Central Committee meeting held on Friday and Saturday. We have national office bearers of the party present. Let me introduce them as follows. Comrade Joyce Murray Moroba is the national treasurer of the SACP. Comrade Chris Matlaku is the second deputy general secretary of the SACP. Comrade Tulas Ngesi, who we should hold accountable for our rest period, is the deputy national chair of the SACP. Comrade Solima Paila will be joining us in due course, so we will start before he joins us so that the session becomes a success. He has a technical issue. Our national chairperson, Comrade Senzeni Zokwana, has been given leave of absence. We also have the head of the office of the Secretariat or General Secretary, Comrade Jenny Schreiner. And we have our support staff, Comrade Zotwa Mudiha and Stembiso Bengu. The latter, Dr. Stembiso Bengu, is based at the Chris Hani Institute as the director. Let me take this opportunity to invite the General Secretary to present the statement of the key outcomes of the Central Committee meeting. Following the presentation, we will take questions from the media and answer them. After answering the last question, we will switch over to a brief statement on the launch of our crowdfunding initiative. We'll deal with it when we get there. May I ask Comrade Hlengza Reloaded to mute yourself, and Comrade Stembiso Bengu to please mute all those who did not mute themselves, because they appear on the screen and also live on television. May you kindly mute Comrade Hlengiwe Nkonyana. General Secretary, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Comrade Alex, the office bearers of the party, and members of the media who have joined us. Let me welcome you. The SACP Central Committee met on Friday and Saturday, 18th to 19th of December 2020. We convened the last plenary session of the Central Committee for the year to evaluate 2020 and adopt the 2021 program of action. The Central Committee expressed its condolences to all the families and relatives who lost their loved ones due to COVID-19, and as a result also of the scourge of gender-based violence. As we concluded our Central Committee meeting yesterday, over 902,000 people were recorded to have contracted the virus in the country since March this year. The majority, over 784,000, recovered, while 24,285 died because of COVID-19 related illnesses. The SACP welcomes and commits to actively support the festive season measures announced by President Ramaphosa last week, to combat COVID-19. We urge the working class and all South Africans to comply with the COVID-19 regulations and basic hygiene measures especially also in the light of the threat of a second surge of infections. The Central Committee declared the SACP centenary year, 2021, we're turning 100 next year. We've declared it the year of mass activism by the working class and poor, whilst at the same time strictly observing COVID-19 preventative protocols. And we will do this mainly through localized actions. In this year of mass activism, we'll be guided by our theme, Put People Before Profits. And this will involve, as a main objective, the forging of a broad popular left front, and also to enhance the capacity of the working class generally to increase in influence in society, especially in the light of what we see as a neoliberal onslaught and its austerity agenda, and also to mobilize the working class against corruption and against generally the undermining of its own interests. And we will elaborate shortly on these. The SACP 2021 Programme of Action will encapsulate our Red October campaign 2020 to 2021 objectives, which is eradication of hunger, healthcare for all, human settlements, and water. The objectives of our program of action will also include deepening the campaign against interpersonal and gender-based violence and the campaign against retrenchments. We will also focus on supporting the implementation of the progressive pillars of the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Program as supported by the network labor, business and community constituencies and announced by President Ramaphosa earlier in the year. In supporting increased investment into infrastructure, which is a key pillar of the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Program, that also includes social infrastructure, the SACP will seek to work with its allies in support of infrastructure investments, the wider labor movement, community and broader democratic movement, also in order to embark on a campaign to protect community infrastructure from big vandalism. The Central Committee expressed its serious concerns at what we see as growing vandalization and sometimes destruction of public property and infrastructure. Protests is something that we need to mobilize against. In this age of the deepening and widening technological revolution, we need public infrastructure to bridge the digital divide, close the gap in access to information and communications technology as an important component of advancing development. This includes ensuring public control over the broadband spectrum. Part of our campaign of placing people before profits is to say we are against the privatization of broadband spectrum. And over and above that, we would like, as the South African Communist Party, to see spectrum reserved for community use, including for social purposes like education and public health. The Central Committee has placed emphasis in this development imperative for our centenary program in 2021. We will therefore also include intensification of the campaign for access to Wi-Fi, including free access, especially in working class and poor communities, with rural areas being given equal attention as urban areas. The problems of persisting underdevelopment, including the lack of access to connectivity exposed by COVID-19, when schools, colleges, and universities shifted learning and teaching to the digital space, cannot be left unresolved. In fact, COVID-19 has further exposed us in terms of inequality of access to connectivity. Neither should the idea that profit-driven interests are an answer to connectivity and affordable mobile data. The forces of private wealth accumulation in the ICT industry, over and above the pre-COVID-19 high mobile data charges, made a killing from exploiting the COVID-19 lockdown regulations when most organizations and individuals shifted to the digital space for purposes of work, including education and training. In fact, the Central Committee noted with concern reports by Oxfam, amongst others, that the profits of the dollar billionaires in the world rose by $1 trillion just this year during COVID-19 lockdown period. And the main beneficiaries have been the big ICT companies who have made a killing. As the SACP, we are concerned that COVID-19 has actually exacerbated inequalities in societies across the globe. And it's something that in our own country we want to take up to campaign for better access. The SACP will convene an education session and conference early next year to reflect on curriculum transformation and how to achieve equal education in the basic education sector, the development of and support for the technical and vocational education and training colleges, and transformation in universities, including transformation in the innovation, research, and development landscape. This session on education, which we will convene, will also pay equal attention to the imperative of driving a skills revolution, considering continuously expanding advances in the deepening and widening of the technological revolution. The SACP will invite its allies, other progressive formations, and relevant authorities to participate at the session. Let me now turn to other resolutions of the Central Committee to further elaborate on 2021 as our centenary year of mass activism and placing people before profits. The Central Committee talked about what we call the fourfold crisis facing capitalism today, which is COVID-19. The second one, the deepening economic crisis. The third one, the crisis, what we call the crisis of social reproduction, which we'll explain further later, and the catastrophic crisis of climate change. As South Africa, we are facing the same challenges. On the COVID-19 pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic has entered the second wave in South Africa and other countries. Just after adjourning on the first day of our Central Committee on Friday, the government, through the Department of Health and the Department of Science and Innovation, together with scientists, announced that there is a new, more transmissible variant of COVID-19 in South Africa, and which has a high viral load. It was discovered that the new variant has a profound expression in the second surge of COVID-19 pandemic underway. The Department of Science and Innovation supported and funded this scientific research process that has led to this discovery. In participating in this press conference, I myself, on behalf of government and my department in that instance, I pledged continued support for the scientific research to monitor the mutation of the virus as part of the wider government effort to contain the spread of COVID-19. The Central Committee then joined Dr. Mkhize, the Minister of Health, in his call to all the people in South Africa to comply with the COVID-19 preventative measures as announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa on the 14th of December 2020. And as the SACP, we are pledging our own support to these initiatives. The Central Committee reiterated the SACP's call for more decisive implementation of the National Health Insurance. Immediate implementation of the NHI, as we call it, is essential for the success of our national effort to contain the spread of COVID-19 and prepare the country to overcome any future pandemic outbreaks. The struggle for a national health insurance will be an important component of the SACP's 2021 program of action, our centenary year, to ensure that indeed, as a country, we do put people before profits. The SACP calls upon the World Health Organization to ensure that COVID-19 vaccine development is geared towards making the COVID-19 vaccine universally accessible as a public good. As the COVID-19 global pandemic crisis demonstrably underlined, any neglect of one part of the world will affect the entire world. So there must be equitable distribution of the vaccine worldwide. The Central Committee further denounced unscientific utterances promoting conspiracy theories and quakery, to be quite honest, against scientific vaccine development. Having in the past as a country gone through a devastating period of AIDS denialism, we cannot allow another bout of dangerous vaccine denialism and anti-vaccine postures. The COVID-19 pandemic has further exposed and deepened the capitalist crisis of high levels of inequality, unemployment, and poverty in our country. South Africa recorded a slight recovery in its gross domestic product for the third quarter as a result of easing its lockdown. While this is important, the reality, however, is that South Africa is yet to recover the 2.2 million jobs lost in the second quarter of 2020 and more other jobs that have been lost thereafter as the capitalist bosses continue to retrench workers, largely in protection of their profits. The jobs created in the third quarter are too far away from overcoming the damage caused by the pandemic. The Central Committee further committed to something that we regard as very important, that the SACP must campaign for the development and incorporation of measures of inequality, unemployment, and poverty reduction as key indicators against which we must all judge economic progress in our country. This is important, so that we don't just rely on a generalized notion of GDP or GDP per capita, whilst levels of poverty, inequality, and unemployment remain entrenched. We say this, by the way, as the SACP, because in the past, South Africa has had very high periods of GDP growth, but accompanied by rising unemployment and rising levels of inequality and poverty. So GDP as a measure on its own is far from adequate. We are calling for now, talking about measuring the performance of our economy, we must have indicators all the time that tell us about levels of employment or unemployment, poverty levels, and inequality. So that also we talk a simple language to the people of our country on how our economy is doing. On the crisis of social reproduction, which really is about the struggle by households, families, and communities to make ends meet, Central Committee pointed out that because of the capitalist crisis of inequality, unemployment, and poverty, many working class and poor households have been struggling to support life itself. The withdrawal of the COVID-19 Social Relief of Distress Grant early next year will see many of its beneficiaries sink deeper into destitution without any mitigation. The implications for the government and society at large of the combined effects of the persisting high levels of inequality, unemployment, and poverty, and the impact of social reproduction crisis are unimaginable. It is therefore crucial for the working class to close ranks and confront neoliberalism and its austerity agenda. This is one of the key tasks the Central Committee reaffirmed and underlined for the SACP to deepen. The Central Committee reaffirmed the SACP's call to the entire progressive trade union movement to close ranks, irrespective of their affiliation to federations, and embark on joint actions to advance the collective interests of the workers and the poor in our country. As the SACP, we will be part of this effort to seek to unite the broader trade union movement to act in concert. While simultaneously campaigning for access to land through a more effective land redistribution program, including security of tenure and the growing of food, the SACP will also campaign for the sustenance of the COVID-19 social relief of distress grant. This will form part of our program of action towards the establishment of a universal income guarantee and the comprehensive social security system that the May 2019 election manifesto of the ANC committed to. Central Committee also spoke about the catastrophic crisis of climate change that continues globally without change, even after the lifting of the lockdown in many countries, without any change in the old environmentally destructive patterns of capitalist production and consumption. Capitalist bosses are interested in profit-making and maximization rather than in protecting and reversing climate change, slowing down and stopping global warming, and ensuring decent standards of living for the workers, their families, and the community. This underlines our theme for next year: put people before profits. To protect life, working class unity to roll back the catastrophic crisis of climate change is essential. The Central Committee will be identifying South Africa's environmental hotspots, for example, in places like the Wentworth community in eThekwini, in KwaZulu-Natal province, Sasolburg in the Free State, and the highly polluted Mpumalanga province. The SACP will work with communities and progressive environmental NGOs to confront environmental destruction. The Wentworth community, for instance, has for years been fighting a lone battle against the toxic environment they find themselves faced with. This time around, the SACP is drawing a red line. We will support the Wentworth community as well as other communities in their struggle against their environment that is being polluted. Central Committee also spoke at length about the damage caused by state capture and especially the issue of what we see as the destruction of many Black professionals. The destruction caused by state capture goes far beyond what many fully realize. One sector of society that has been hugely and negatively affected has been Black professionals and managers that we so carefully sought to nurture and grow since 1994. As shown through the Zondo Commission and other commissions of inquiry as appointed by the President, is that many Black professionals have had their careers destroyed or compromised, either through their own collusion, some of them, in corrupt activities, or others being victimized for their principled stance against corruption. This has been the case in many of our state-owned entities and other public institutions, including in places like the public broadcaster, the SABC. In fact, corruption and state capture has caused havoc in destroying careers of many Black professionals and managers It's a matter that we are concerned about as the SACP, because we are concerned about building the capacity of the state with competent professionals and managers. State capture and corruption has also involved the forging of patronage networks, paying bribe, tax, and rent, having due processes manipulated or circumvented, governance decay and mismanagement, the co-opting of professionals and managers, and the other rot exposed through various public investigations. The capture has been at the heart of destroying state capacity, and as I have said, with many black professionals and managers as collateral damage. The year 2020 saw some important and significant progress in exposing those involved or complicit in corruption. The Central Committee reaffirmed its support for the work of the Zondo Commission. The SACP is calling for full cooperation from all those called upon to testify or give answers on their role before the Commission. We want to distance ourselves completely as the SACP and condemn strongly any grandstanding and attempts to discredit the Zondo Commission. The work of the Zondo Commission is a very crucial part of restoring the moral fiber of our society, including the moral fiber of our own movement and alliance. South Africa needs more decisive action to overcome the damage caused by state capture and corporate malfeasance. We must also emphasize that the reason why the SACP used the concept of corporate capture of the state was also to actually underline the fact that the corruption is not only inside the state, but it's happening in conjunction with corruption that emanates from the private sector. We must deal with this cancer wherever it is, both in the public and private sectors. That's why we are saying that the measures that must be taken to deal with state capture and corruption must be wide-ranging in scope, even also including, by the way, the role played by multinational corporations, some of whom now are trying to give us a saw by saying they are going to pay back. Yes, they must pay back, but that is not enough. We need to know more, and the culprits must be dealt with. We cannot, as a country, be allowed to be bought, much as it is important to pay that money back, but we want much more serious action. The SACP has warned before that it is incorrect, and we reject the allegation that the whole of the ANC is corrupt or the whole of the state is corrupt. Nevertheless, we have warned that unless corruption and corporate capture were dealt with severely and decisively, these problems risk becoming systemic and difficult to reverse. The SACP also supports the stance taken by the ANC that all those charged with corruption before the courts of law should step aside until their names are cleared. We will do the same as the SACP as well. In the same manner, South Africans should not ignore the charges brought against the public protector for perjury in a court of law. There is no reason in principle why a different standard must apply. The public protector, especially also both the office and any incumbent, must act according to the law. And any damning court judgments against the public protector now requires serious action as well as serious and honest reflection about the manner in which this office is operating and the manner in which it has been found wanting. South Africa needs a capable and honest public protector and not the one who's actually had some damning judgments against it. So action must be taken against anyone, anywhere, in line with our commitment to root out malfeasance in society. Neoliberalism and its austerity agenda on the one hand, and sustained corruption through state capture networks on the other hand, are bedeviling economic reconstruction and recovery in our country. Central Committee reflected very deeply on these matters, that in fact what we are facing are twin dangers at this point in time, that of neoliberalism on the one hand, together with its austerity agenda, and state capture and its corruption networks on the other. And these terrible twins actually run the risk of reversing the many gains we've made over the last 26 years of our democratic dispensation. Fiscal consolidation through austerity, or austerity through fiscal consolidation, whatever fancy name you call it, results in a common outcome, that of cuts in budgets affecting social and other developmental spending with negative consequences for economic development. The agenda was, and still is, unfortunately, that is supporting neoliberal policy emanating from the National Treasury. The SACP has consistently stated its displeasure that some of these policies being pursued are a copy and paste from the neoliberal policies as advanced by the Paris-based OECD and the Washington-based International Monetary Fund. Just as the SACP said in the wake of the adoption of GEAR in 1996, neoliberal policies are wholly inappropriate for a country like South Africa, and they are not an answer to the huge developmental challenges that we face as a country. The budget cuts to fund SAA, for instance, were also deliberately designed to provoke outrage that spurs on the privatization agenda as an alternative to fiscal funding of state-owned enterprises. While the ANC and the Alliance called for support to ensure that the SAA business rescue process becomes successful, we never said the National Treasury must cut the budgets for social services and other developmental imperatives. The budgeting process reflected, more than anything else, this attempt to impose a neoliberal policy like it happened in 1996 and an austerity agenda. It is the SACP's considered view, as articulated by the Central Committee, that a radical transformation of the National Treasury to rid it of its neoliberal paradigm is essential. And as the SACP, the Central Committee decided, we are going to be squarely placing this issue on the agenda for priority discussion in our alliance. The austerity agenda is being pushed also through the counter-application in the public service and administration wage bill dispute, culminating in the judgment delivered by the Labour Appeal Court this week, which to us as the SACP deals a serious blow to South Africa's collective bargaining system. While we respect the judiciary, the reality is that this judgment does not represent a shadow of the resolution of this dispute, unfortunately, as the primary problem remains. The SACP expressed its active solidarity with and will continue its active support for the workers. This will include support for the trade union movement and also approaches to the Constitutional Court. Should the matter remain unresolved, the SACP will support the united action of the labour movement in calling for fresh negotiations to ensure that there is a collective bargaining agreement covering the affected period of wage adjustments. The Central Committee put it very strongly, its view, that it is better for all parties or for both parties in the public sector dispute to engage rather than to embark on actions that threaten the collective bargaining system that South Africa's working class spent decades fighting for and out of which serious sacrifices were made. In other words, as the SACP, we are of the view, irrespective of the outcome of any court case, it's not going to resolve the fundamental problem of the necessity to engage. While we respect the judiciary and its independence, as we have said, the Central Committee disagrees with the comments of the Labour Appeal Court simplistically likening wage adjustments for workers to social grants. Important as social grants are, wage increases are a right or at least an entitlement based on the rendering of the required labor in return for remuneration. The challenge for negotiations in both the public and the private sector in a period of hardship must not be compounded by the threats posed to the institution of collective bargaining. On the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Program, the success of the government's Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan lies in its potential to overcome the persisting high levels of inequality, unemployment, and poverty, thus relieving many households and families from the pressures of being unable to put food on the table. We are very pleased that this Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Program has and also continues to be consulted upon by the social partners at NETLEC. More of these consultations are needed to ensure economic reconstruction, recovery, and development so that we are able to confront the challenges of inequality, unemployment, and poverty. The SACP welcomes the prioritization of infrastructure spending in the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Program. However, reliance on financialization, to put it differently and simply, reliance on problematic ways of funding infrastructure or lack of investment into infrastructure as a result of the investment strike by the financial sector will prove to be a problem. The SACP calls upon government to take measures to put pressure on the financial sector to release the billions, if not trillions of rands of monies in pension and retirement funds that remain uninvested. In fact, if there is one crime against the people of South Africa by the financial sector, is the trillions and trillions of rands that remain uninvested when the country's productive economy is battling and when we are facing such high levels of unemployment. This includes the monies that are in pension and retirement funds that remains uninvested. The SACP is concerned that, unlike the international norm, South Africa invests only about 2% of its retirement funds into infrastructure development. The SACP also calls upon the public investment corporations, which is handling public sector workers' pension funds, to invest into infrastructure development. And also other developmental financial institutions like the Industrial Development Corporation and the Development Bank of Southern Africa must prioritize investment into infrastructure and the productive sectors of our economy. The Central Committee was of the view that by and large, the financial sector has been left to get away with murder. Its poor handling of the COVID-19 state guaranteed loan scheme further exposed the financial sector and its lack of will to invest in a manner that supports our economic development priorities. The Central Committee committed the SACP to intensify the financial sector transformation campaign in 2021 to ensure that the financial sector is pushed towards investing its resources in a manner that will enable us as a country to develop. On local government elections scheduled to take place in 2021, Central Committee noted the engagements that took place in the alliance on the local government elections taking place later next year. The Alliance Secretariat agreed to allow the SACP and COSATU time to consult internally with their structures and return to Alliance discussions before the start of the next election campaign processes for further engagements. Central Committee welcomed the outcome of the ANC's last NEC meeting that committed to serious engagement within the alliance on matters relating to the forthcoming local government elections. One thing is certain for us: a united ANC-led alliance electoral contest depends on the elections candidates' selections guideline that reflect the letter and the spirit of the alliance reconfiguration processes. As per the SACP and COSATU joint statement after our bilateral meeting that we issued on the 1st of December 2020, as the two working class formations in the alliance, we are at one on the necessity for a reconfigured alliance and inclusive alliance electoral processes. The SACP will convene an election preparatory session early next year to finalize our own consultations on the local government elections candidate selection guidelines and on its other preparations for the forthcoming local government elections. In this regard, we will be guided by our Special National Congress resolutions adopted in December 2019 that as the SACP will not accept or support candidate councillors that are imposed on communities or that are corrupt or candidates that are emanating from factional slates. We must also say we welcome the ANC's commitment that any candidate councillor who is implicated in gender-based violence will be removed from the list of the ANC. So shall we do so also as the SACP on any communists who are on ANC lists who are accused of gender-based violence. We won't support them and they must be removed from the candidates list as part of our commitment to fight the scourge. The Central Committee will further spell out on how to deal with such cases where unpopular or corrupt candidates are being imposed on us. The last issue that the Central Committee spoke about related to international solidarity. Central Committee expressed its ongoing solidarity with the people of Swaziland who are struggling for democracy and the people of Zimbabwe who are facing a monumental economic crisis, as well as the people of Somaliland. The SACP calls for an end to all wars on the African continent in favor of peaceful settlement of disputes. We also strongly support, as the SACP, the African Union's commitment to silence the guns on our continent. Central Committee denounced in the strongest possible terms the proclamation signed by the outgoing United States President, Mr. Donald Trump, wanting to recognize the so-called sovereignty of Morocco over Western Sahara in exchange for Morocco establishing full diplomatic relations with the apartheid Israeli regime. Central Committee expressed solidarity with the people of Western Sahara and Palestine and called upon Morocco and Israel to end their respective occupation of Western Sahara and Palestinian territories. SACP Central Committee also congratulates the left in Kerala, including the Communist parties of India, for their decisive victories in the recently held elections, and also congratulated the Movement for Socialism for its electoral victory in Bolivia. In conclusion, the Central Committee urged the global community, including the United States of America, Canada, and the European Union, to respect the outcomes of Venezuela's elections for its National Assembly, and the SACP also expressed its solidarity with the Venezuelan people and its Bolivarian revolution. I thank you very much.